At the first family dinner after I came back from law school, I showed up pregnant. Before I could say a word, my father raised his voice. "You're a disgrace, not welcome here, you're no longer part of this family." And my mother added, "You chose failure, so sleep on the streets." I left with a suitcase and a law degree in my hand. A week later they found out who the baby's father was. They begged me to forgive them. I'm Laura, 25, and I was standing in my childhood dining room with a law degree from Yale in one hand, and a baby bump I could no longer hide beneath my clothes. It was supposed to be a homecoming dinner, a celebration of 6 years of grueling, relentless academic effort. I had pictured this moment, perhaps naively, as one of triumph. I had visualized mild surprise, maybe even a reluctant smile of pride from my father. What I received was something else entirely. I watched my father's face, a canvas that rarely betrayed emotion beyond mild irritation, contort through a spectrum of colors. It started with a pale white of shock, shifted to a blotchy red of confusion, and finally settled on a deep, terrifying purple of pure rage. The transformation was more dramatic than any chemical reaction I'd witnessed in a lab. "You're a disgrace," he finally spat, his voice low and guttural. He slammed his hand on the oak table, a piece of furniture I had eaten at my entire life, making the familiar dishes jump and rattle. "Not welcome here. Not part of this family anymore." The words hit me with a physical force, knocking the breath from my lungs. I instinctively put a hand over my stomach, a protective gesture that only seemed to fuel his fury. I turned my eyes to my mother, pleading for some kind of defense. A buffer. A single word of moderation. Instead, my mother chimed in, her voice thin and sharp, her own special brand of maternal warmth. "You chose failure," she said, her eyes cold as they raked over my body, lingering on the undeniable swell of my abdomen. "So, sleep on the streets." And just like that, my homecoming dinner became my exile ceremony. The pot roast, which I had smelled upon entering, now seemed rancid in the air, thick with disappointment and betrayal. The real kicker, the truly astonishing part of this entire nightmare, was that they hadn't even asked. They hadn't asked who the father was. They hadn't asked if I was okay, if I was healthy, if I was scared. They hadn't asked about my plans, my job, my future. If they had, well, let's just say their reaction would have been very different. But I guess when you're more concerned with what the neighbors at church will whisper than your pregnant daughter's well-being, details like that don't matter. The silence that followed their pronouncements was heavy and absolute. I stood there, rooted to the spot, my expensive law degree suddenly feeling like a worthless piece of paper. 6 years of perfect grades, of law review, of sacrificing my social life, of job offers from top firms in Chicago, none of it mattered. It was all erased by this one biological fact. "That's it?" I finally asked, my voice surprisingly steady, betraying none of the seismic shock waves tearing through me. "Your pregnant daughter comes home with a law degree from Yale, and you throw her out? No questions asked?" "What's there to ask?" Dad's voice dripped with a disgust so profound it made my skin crawl. "Obviously you've ruined your life. Pregnant and unwed." He gestured vaguely at my stomach. "Probably don't even know who the father is. What will people say? What will we tell Pastor Stevens?" Ah, there it was. The real concern. Not my well-being, not their grandchild's future, but the gossip. The potential scandal that would tarnish the pristine image of the Morrison family in our tiny Indiana hometown. "I'm engaged," I managed to say, the words feeling dry in my throat. "The wedding is in August. I have a job lined up at Kirkland & Ellis in Chicago. I start in September." "Lies. Lies to make yourself feel better," Mom cut in, already clearing my plate from the table, a symbolic removal. "No decent man would have you now. Get out. Get out before someone sees you here." I stared at them, these two people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. These were the parents who had demanded perfection, who had scrutinized every report card, who had insisted that success was the only acceptable path. And now, faced with a version of my life that didn't fit their narrow script, they had simply deleted me. "Fine," I said. I bent down and picked up the suitcase I had left by the door, the one I had planned to unpack in my old room. "I'll go." I walked to the front door, each step feeling heavy, as if I were wading through wet cement. I paused at the threshold, looking back one last time at the dining room, at the two people who were now strangers to me. "But remember this moment," I said, the newfound calm in my voice scaring even me. Remember that you chose your reputation over your daughter. Over your own grandchild. Don't come crying back when he leaves you. Mom called after me, her voice a final, parting shot. We won't be here for you. Actually, I said, turning back slightly, a bitter, ironic smile twisting my lips. He's flying in tomorrow to meet you. But thanks for the concern. The door slammed with a satisfying, definitive bang. I made it to my beat-up car, the one that had faithfully carried me through 3 years of law school before the rage hit. It wasn't just sadness, it was a white-hot, blinding fury. How dare they? How dare they assume the worst of me? How dare they, after I had done everything they ever asked of me, treat me like garbage? But underneath the anger was a chasm of hurt so deep and so vast I felt I might fall into it and never get out. I couldn't breathe. I sat in that driveway for 10 long minutes, the engine off, the silence of the suburban night deafening. I tried to figure out my next move. Hotels in town were limited. There was a seedy motel by the highway and a slightly less sketchy place downtown. I had savings from my summer internships, but most of it was earmarked for bar exam prep materials and the deposit on my Chicago apartment. I couldn't stay here. I put the key in the ignition, my hands shaking so hard it took 3 tries. I pulled out of the driveway, not even looking back, and drove to the only place that felt remotely safe, the 24-hour glow of a McDonald's parking lot. I sat there, under the hum of the fluorescent lights, and finally I let myself cry. The tears came, hot and silent at first, then progressing to the ugly, gasping sobs of someone whose world had just been detonated. I was parked between a pickup truck and a rusty sedan, lit by the buzzing, sickly yellow glow of the McDonald's sign. A law degree from Yale and nowhere to go but a fast food parking lot. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so pathetic. I was homeless. My own parents, in the span of a 5-minute conversation, had made me homeless. My hand, still shaking, fumbled for my phone. I had one call to make. One person who needed to know that our carefully constructed plans had just been violently derailed. I scrolled to his name, Michael, and pressed the screen. He picked up on the second ring, his voice cheerful and full of the hope I had lost. Hey. You made it. How'd it go? He asked, the optimism in his voice like a physical pain. Are they shocked? Happy? Do I need to book my flight right now to charm my future in-laws? I opened my mouth, but all that came out was a broken sob. Laura. His voice changed instantly. The cheerfulness vanished, replaced by a sharp, focused concern. Laura, what's wrong? What happened? Are you okay? Is the baby okay? They kicked me out, I whispered, the words sounding insane even as I said them. What? The single word was flat. Devoid of comprehension. About as well as the Titanic, I said, a bitter laugh bubbling up through the tears. They kicked me out, Michael. They saw I was pregnant, called me a disgrace, and told me to sleep on the streets. They what? The shock in his voice was genuine, profound. He couldn't process it. To him, family was a safe harbor. Laura, I'm so sorry. Where are you? Are you driving? Please tell me you're not driving. I'm in the McDonald's parking lot, I said, the humiliation of it washing over me again. I was trying to figure out if the motel by the highway still has hourly rates or if they've gone upscale to daily. Absolutely not. His tone was immediate, non-negotiable. My dad's house is 10 minutes from town. It has 12 bedrooms. You're staying there tonight. Michael, I can't, I protested, the idea horrifying. I can't just show up at your father's house. At Robert Hastings' house. He's my dad's boss. I'm pregnant and homeless. What will he think? He'll think your parents are idiots. Which they are, Michael retorted, his anger palpable through the phone. You are carrying his grandchild. You are my fiancé. You are family. More family than those people who just threw you out. I'm calling him right now. Michael, wait. I pleaded, not ready for this next step, for this new level of complication. But he'd already hung up. I sat there, staring at my phone, my panic escalating. This was not the plan. The plan was to back up, to explain how we got here. I met Michael Hastings my freshman year at Yale. Out of thousands of students, what were the odds that someone from my tiny Indiana hometown would end up in my pre-law program? But there he was, the son of my father's boss, looking just as homesick and out of place as I felt. We bonded over shared memories of the county fair and mutual complaints about East Coast winters. For 3 years of undergrad and 3 years of law school, we kept our relationship a secret when we were home. Not because we were ashamed, but because I knew my father. Gerald Morrison was a man obsessed with appearances and hierarchy. He'd either accuse me of gold digging, of using his boss's son, or worse, he'd try to use my relationship to advance his own career. I could picture it clearly. "Hey boss, great quarter. By the way, my daughter's dating your son. How about that promotion?" The thought made my skin crawl. So, when we visited home for holidays, we arrived separately. We were just friends. At Yale, we were the couple everyone knew, the inseparable legal nerds. Back home, we were just 2 kids from the same town. The secret wore on us, but we planned to reveal everything after graduation, after the bar exam, when I could stand on my own 2 feet, my own accomplishments undeniable. Then, 2 pink lines changed our timeline. I found out I was pregnant in January of my final semester. Morning sickness during criminal procedure lectures. Hiding my growing bump under oversized blazers during mock trials. Law school was hard enough without creating life at the same time. Michael, when I told him, was ecstatic. His parents, when we told them over a video call a week later, were over the moon. His mother, Margaret, apparently started knitting immediately. His father, Robert, had opened a college fund before we'd even picked out names. Finally, Robert Hastings had boomed over the phone. A grandchild to spoil. They wanted to throw us an engagement party, help plan the wedding, be involved grandparents. The contrast to what had just happened with my family would have been funny if it wasn't so heartbreakingly tragic. By graduation in May, I was 5 months pregnant and running out of ways to hide it. The flowing graduation robes helped, but I knew the clock was ticking. Michael wanted to come with me to tell my parents to stand beside me. But I had insisted he wait. "Let me tell them first," I'd said, so naive it was painful to remember. "Your dad can fly in tomorrow once they've processed the news." I had been so stupid. I'd actually believed there'd be a tomorrow in my parents' house. The 12-hour drive home had been torture. I practiced my speech 100 times. I had even prepared a PowerPoint presentation in my head. Yes, really, showcasing my law degree, my job offer, Michael's proposal, our plans, evidence of success, stability, and love. Because if law school taught me anything, it's that evidence matters. But I should have known. Some juries come in with their minds already made up. My phone rang again, pulling me from my reverie. The caller ID was an unknown number, but it was local. My heart leaped, thinking it was my mother, having come to her senses. But the voice on the other end was not my mother's. It was a deep, calm, authoritative baritone. "Laura? This is Robert Hastings." My blood ran cold. "Mr. Hastings," I stammered. I'm so sorry." "Nothing to be sorry for, Laura." Michael told me what happened. His voice was kind but firm. "I'm sending my driver to get you." "Where are you?" "Mr. Hastings, I couldn't possibly impose." "Where are you, Laura?" he repeated, his tone brooking no argument. This was the man who ran Hastings Industries, a man used to giving orders and having them followed. I'm at the McDonald's on Route 40. The words were mortifying. He didn't laugh. He didn't even pause. "He'll be there in 20 minutes. His name is James. He'll be in a black town car." The line clicked. 20 minutes later, exactly as he'd said, a pristine black town car pulled into the McDonald's parking lot. It glided to a stop next to my beat-up Honda, looking absurdly out of place. An older gentleman in a crisp suit, James, got out, took my suitcase from my trunk without a word about the bizarre pickup location, and held the back door open for me. The ride to the Hastings estate was surreal. I'd driven past those gates countless times growing up, the towering iron bars and sprawling lawns a symbol of the unattainable wealth that defined our town's other half. I had never, in my wildest dreams, imagined I'd be entering them. Especially not like this, pregnant, disowned, and rescued from a burger joint. The house, it wasn't a house. It was a mansion. It looked like something from a magazine, all stone and glass, with fountains and marble columns and windows that reflected the setting sun like gold. My Honda would have looked ridiculous in that driveway. Thank God for James and the town car. Robert Hastings met me at the door himself. He was all 6 feet 3 inches of him, dressed in a cashmere sweater and slacks, looking every bit the successful businessman he was. This was my father's boss. The man whose approval determined careers, the man my father spoke of with a mixture of reverence and fear. And here I was, showing up on his doorstep like a stray cat. He didn't look angry. He didn't look disgusted. He looked warm. "Laura," he said, his voice gentle as he pulled me into a hug that surprised us both. It was a firm, paternal hug that I hadn't realized I was craving. "Come in, sweetheart. You look exhausted." Sweetheart. My own father hadn't called me that since I was 5. The simple word, spoken with such genuine kindness, broke the dam again. I started crying, right there in the foyer, which was larger than the entire ground floor of my childhood home and featured a chandelier that probably cost more than my law school debt. Robert just held me for a moment, patting my back. "It's all right, child," he murmured. "You're safe now. You're home." Robert guided me past the cavernous foyer, his hand gently on my elbow, steering me away from the intimidating marble and crystal and into a comfortable sitting room. It was still opulent, with a fireplace I could have stood up in and bookshelves that stretched to the ceiling, but it was also warm and clearly lived in. Plush sofas, family photographs in silver frames, a half-finished puzzle on a side table. He settled me onto a deep velvet sofa that felt like a cloud. "First things first," he said, taking a seat in the armchair opposite me. His gaze was kind but also appraising, like he was assessing a complex situation. "Have you eaten? And I don't mean a stress-eaten fry from the McDonald's parking lot. I'm fine, really. I'm just..." "That wasn't really a question," he said, not unkindly. He pressed a small button on an intercom on the side table. "Maria, could you prepare something substantial for Laura, please? And ready the blue suite." "Yes, thank you." A moment later, a pleasant-looking woman in a simple uniform appeared as if by magic, nodded at Robert, gave me a small, sympathetic smile and disappeared. "Mr. Hastings, I am so sorry to impose like this," I started, the words tumbling out. "This is mortifying. You don't know me, and I'm just showing up here." "I know you better than you think, Laura," he said, waving off my apology. "And you are not imposing. You are family. Michael's told us so much about you over the years." He paused, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Well, after he finally admitted you two were together, that is." I blinked, confused. You knew?" Robert smiled, a genuine, warm smile this time. "Laura, I've known since your sophomore year. Did you really think my son could hide being that deeply in love for 6 years? He's many things, smart, dedicated, stubborn, but subtle isn't one of them. I'd see his call log, Laura, 5 times a day. I'd hear him on the phone, his voice completely different. I put 2 and 2 together. But you never said anything. Not to me, not to my father." "It wasn't my secret to tell," he said simply. "You both clearly had your reasons for privacy. I respected that. I assumed it had something to do with your father and his position at my company. Though I will admit," he added, steepling his fingers, "I did wonder why you never came to any of our family events with him. Margaret was dying to meet the brilliant young woman who had apparently civilized our son." The confession spilled out of me, a rush of shame and justification. "I was afraid," I admitted, my voice small. "I know my father. He would have either accused me of gold digging, of trying to trap Michael, or worse." "Worse?" Robert prompted, his gaze sharpening. "He would have tried to use it," I whispered, the ugly truth hanging in the air. "He would have seen it as leverage. A way to get ahead at Hastings Industries. He would have made my relationship with Michael transactional. I couldn't do that. I couldn't do it to Michael, and I couldn't do it to you." Robert's expression darkened. He nodded slowly, as if I had just confirmed a long-held, unpleasant suspicion. "Yes," he said, his voice flat. "I can see him doing exactly that. You showed remarkable judgment, Laura. More than someone your age should have to." He leaned forward. "Now tell me exactly what happened tonight. From the moment you walked in that door." So I did. The whole sordid story poured out of me. The drive home, practicing my speech, my idiotic mental PowerPoint presentation. The pot roast and the cold greeting. My mother's comment about my weight. My father's eyes zeroing in on my bump. The explosion. The words, disgrace, failure, sleep on the streets. By the end of it, I was ugly crying again, into a linen handkerchief that Robert had passed me, a monogrammed RH in the corner. Tissues that probably cost more than my weekly groceries. They didn't even ask, I said between sobs, the injustice of it stinging more than the rejection itself. They didn't ask who the father was. They just assumed. Assumed I was. I don't even know what. Some irresponsible, promiscuous. I don't know. They thought about themselves, Robert said quietly, his voice a low rumble of controlled anger. They thought about their image. Their reputation in that small town. They did not think about you, and they did not think about their grandchild. Their loss. Maria returned then, wheeling in a small cart. On it was a tray laden with a steaming bowl of soup, a sandwich piled high with turkey, a small salad, and a tall glass of milk. The baby apparently was starving, even if I wasn't. As I ate, my hands still shaking, Robert moved to the desk in the corner of the room and made a few quiet phone calls. I caught fragments. Yes, the blue suite. No, she'll need everything. Shopping tomorrow. Margaret's flight. Yes, whatever she needs. Thank you, James. When he returned, he sat across from me, his expression serious but compassionate. Michael tells me you have a job offer in Chicago. Kirkland and Ellis. I nodded, swallowing a bite of the sandwich. I start in September after I take the bar exam in July. Excellent firm. You'll do well there, he said, as if it were a foregone conclusion. He paused, carefully composing his next words. Laura, I know Gerald Morrison has worked for my company for 17 years. I want you to know, unequivocally, that this situation, your relationship with Michael, your presence here, your parents' deplorable behavior, will have no bearing on his employment. His job is safe, as long as he performs adequately. I looked up, startled. It was the one thing I hadn't even let myself worry about yet, the inevitable professional fallout. You don't have to do that, I said. After what they... Yes, I do, he interrupted firmly. You are worried about repercussions for him. I am assuring you there won't be any. Not from my end, at least. The meaning was clear. My father might create his own problems, but they wouldn't come from Robert Hastings as retaliation. You have enough to worry about right now. You do not need to carry the weight of your father's career on your shoulders. That is my decision, and it is final. We sat in silence for a moment as I absorbed this. He had, in one short speech, neutralized my deepest, most specific fear. Can I ask you something? I said quietly, setting the napkin down. Anything. Why are you being so kind to me? You barely know me. For all you knew, I was a gold digger. Or worse. Robert Hastings looked genuinely surprised by the question. Laura, he said, leaning forward again, his eyes locking with mine. You are carrying my grandchild. You are the woman my son has loved for 6 years. You are, by all accounts, including the ones from my contacts at Yale Law, a brilliant young attorney who earned every single thing you have through your own merit. Why wouldn't I be kind to you? Your parents, he said, his voice blunt, are fools. Their loss, Laura. Truly. Now let's get you settled. Michael's flight gets in at 2 p.m. tomorrow. His mother is flying in as well on a red-eye. She'll be here in the morning. She's enthusiastic. She's already bought out half of Chicago's baby stores, I'm afraid. She doesn't even know if it's a boy or a girl. I laughed, a small, watery sound. Doesn't matter to Margaret, he chuckled. She's been waiting for grandchildren since Michael graduated high school. Maria will show you to your room. The blue suite was bigger than my entire first apartment. It was decorated in serene shades of blue and cream, with a 4-poster bed that felt like climbing into a cloud, its own sitting area with a fireplace, and a white marble bathroom that belonged in a 5-star spa. There were already toiletries laid out, a plush robe on the bed, and a bottle of sparkling water with a note, "Rest well. R.H." I woke in that bed, sunlight streaming through the massive windows, disoriented. For a confusing second, I thought I was back in my dorm room late for a final. Then the events of the previous night crashed back in on me. The fight. The exile. The rescue. A soft, hesitant knock interrupted my thoughts. Come in, I called, expecting Maria. Instead, Margaret Hastings entered, looking impossibly impeccable in a cream-colored pantsuit, despite apparently having taken a red-eye flight. She was elegant, with kind eyes and a warm smile that immediately put me at ease. Laura, she rushed over, not walking but gliding, and pulled me into a careful hug, mindful of my bump. Oh, my dear. I am so sorry we are finally meeting like this. I wanted to fly out for your graduation, but Robert said you and Michael were still keeping things quiet. I'm Margaret. Mrs. Hastings. Margaret. Please, she insisted, sitting on the edge of the bed and taking my hand. Her hands were warm and soft. Or Mom, eventually. If you're comfortable. No pressure. She studied me, her gaze full of a genuine, motherly concern that I hadn't realized I'd been starving for. How are you feeling? Really? Morning sickness still? Sometimes, I admitted. It's better now. Mostly. I'm just processing. It feels surreal. Yesterday I had parents. Today I don't. Oh, sweetheart, Margaret said, her thumb rubbing the back of my hand. You have us. I know it's not the same. But you have us. And we are thrilled. Another knock, this one firmer, and the door opened before I could answer. It was Michael. He looked tired from his flight, his hair rumpled, but his face lit up the second he saw me. I'll give you two some privacy, Margaret said, squeezing my hand again. She stood and kissed my forehead. But we are going shopping later. No arguments. The second the door closed, Michael crossed the room in 2 strides and pulled me into his arms, burying his face in my hair. I'm so sorry, he murmured, his voice thick. I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I should have been there. It wouldn't have changed anything, I whispered, holding on to him like a lifeline. It might have even made it worse. I wanted to take the first flight out last night when you called, he said, pulling back to study my face, his hands cupping my cheeks. My interview. Your interview was important, I insisted. Not more important than you, he said fiercely. Never more important than you. He gently placed his hand on my bump. Or you. He looked around the room. Dad said you were worried about his job? About using our relationship. I was. I am, I admitted. Michael, when my father finds out. Dad's ready for it, he said, his expression grim. He's furious, Laura. I've never seen him this angry. He said to tell you that your only job right now is to rest, study for the bar, and let us take care of you. We can finally plan the wedding. We can move up the date, have a small ceremony here before you start work. Unless you still want the big wedding we planned? I looked up at him, this good, kind man who had been my secret, my anchor, for 6 years. I want to be your wife, I said simply, the tears starting again, but for a different reason now. The rest is just details. He kissed me, and for the first time in 24 hours I felt safe. I wasn't a disgrace. I wasn't a failure. I was in a palace, surrounded by people who were choosing me. I was home. The afternoon with Margaret was unlike any experience I had ever had. She had insisted on a small shopping trip, which, in the Hastings world, apparently meant a private appointment at a high-end boutique in town that had closed its doors to other customers just for us. You need clothes that fit you, my dear, she'd said, waving off my protests. Comfortable, beautiful things. You're growing a human, not smuggling a basketball. You should feel wonderful. I stood in front of a 3-way mirror in a soft emerald green cashmere dress that draped elegantly over my bump, and I couldn't recognize the woman staring back. I looked healthy. Cared for. Margaret sat on a velvet chaise, sipping a small espresso, chatting easily with the sales associate. She wasn't just buying me maternity clothes, she was buying me shoes with better arch support. Your back will thank me in the 3rd trimester, she advised knowingly, prenatal vitamins from a specialty pharmacy, and even a ridiculously expensive moisturizer she swore by to prevent stretch marks. With every item she selected, every story she shared about her own pregnancies with Michael and his sister, she was weaving me into the fabric of her family. She wasn't just being kind, she was actively, joyfully claiming me. I understand you kept the relationship secret because of your father's position, she said over a late lunch at a quiet cafe. Her insight was sharp. That shows remarkable judgment and self-possession for someone so young. Or paranoia, I said wryly, sipping a lemonade. Protective instinct, she corrected gently. You were protecting Michael. You were, in a twisted way, even protecting your father's job from his own worst impulses. And you were protecting yourself. It was very lawyerly of you, actually. My parents didn't see it that way, I said, the memory of the night before casting a brief shadow. Then they're blind, Margaret said with a definitive sniff. They didn't see anything but a perceived scandal. Honestly, the lack of curiosity is what I find most appalling. Their loss, Laura. Truly. It is our immense gain. It was during that lunch that the first tremors of the earthquake began. My phone, which had been blissfully silent on the Do Not Disturb setting, buzzed on the table. It was an unknown number. I ignored it. It buzzed again. And again. 3 missed calls from 3 different unknown numbers, all with the same local area code. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. When we returned to the estate, laden with shopping bags that James silently collected from the trunk, the feeling of sanctuary began to crack. Michael met us in the foyer, his face grim. He was holding his own phone. You need to see this, he said. He showed me a text. It was from a mutual friend from our hometown, someone who worked at the local diner. Hey man, weird question, but is Laura Morrison with you? Just saw her parents at the diner. Her mom was crying and her dad looked like he was going to murder someone. They were asking if anyone had seen Laura. Said she never made it home last night. They're lying, I whispered, my blood running cold. They're already building their story. The missing daughter instead of the exiled one. It gets worse, Michael said, just as my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text message. From my sister, Rebecca. Rebecca lived in Portland. We weren't close, not really. She was 5 years older and had left home the second she turned 18, never looking back, but we maintained a fragile truce. The text read, Laura, what the hell is going on? Mom and Dad are freaking out. Someone saw you at the Hastings estate. They want to know what's going on. They're borderline hysterical. I sank onto a bench in the foyer, the shopping bags at my feet suddenly feeling absurd. Someone saw me, I said, showing Michael the text. Someone saw the town car pick me up at McDonald's or saw me arrive here. Robert emerged from his study, drawn by our tense voices. I handed him my phone and he read the text from Rebecca, his expression hardening. Well, he said, handing it back. The narrative has changed. You are no longer the disgrace. You are now the commodity they've misplaced. What do you want to do? Michael asked, his hand finding mine, his anger a low thrum I could feel. I don't know, I stammered. They're panicking. They are panicking, Robert agreed, but not for the right reasons, I suspect. They are panicking because they've just realized they threw their pregnant daughter out into the night, and that daughter has landed in the home of Gerald's boss, the father of the baby. They are not worried about you, Laura. They are terrified for themselves. For Gerald's job. For the connection they just fumbled. His words, blunt and cold, were the truth. I knew it instantly. The panic wasn't, oh my God, our daughter is alone and scared. The panic was, oh my God, what have we done to our reputation? What have we done to our access? My phone rang again. It was Rebecca. I should talk to her, I said, looking at Michael and Robert. She's the only one who might understand. Put her on speaker, Robert suggested, his voice quiet but firm. Let us be your witnesses. I nodded, my hand trembling as I accepted the call. Hello. Laura. Oh my God, what is happening? Rebecca's voice was shrill, filled with static and genuine confusion. Mom is having a complete and total meltdown. I've never heard her like this. She's saying you've been taken? That you're at the Hastings mansion? She's convinced you went there begging to Dad's boss or worse. I finished for her, my voice bitter. What could possibly be worse in her mind than her pregnant daughter simply existing? I don't know, Laura. She's incoherent. She just keeps saying, Hastings, Hastings, Hastings. And Dad he's just silent, which is almost scarier. He just keeps pacing. Someone called them. Someone from Dad's work, I think. They saw you. They want to know what's going on. I looked at Michael. He nodded, giving my hand a squeeze. It was time. Rebecca, I said, my voice gaining a strength I didn't know I possessed. I'm at the Hastings estate. I'm here because Mom and Dad threw me out last night. They what? They told me you never showed up. They said you were missing. They lied. I showed up for dinner. They saw I was pregnant and Dad called me a disgrace. Mom told me to go sleep on the streets. So I left. I took a deep breath. The baby's father is Michael Hastings. We've been together for 6 years. I'm staying with his family because my family abandoned me. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. I could hear her faint breathing, the sound of a distant car. Michael. Michael Hastings, she finally whispered. As in the Michael Hastings? Robert Hastings' son? Yes. Oh my God, she breathed. Oh my God, Laura. 6 years? And Mom and Dad. Do they know? Did you tell them? Nope, I said, the word popping with a sharp, bitter finality. They didn't ask. They were too busy calling me a failure and worrying about what the neighbors would think. They didn't ask a single question. They just threw me out. They're going to lose their minds, Rebecca whispered, the implications clearly dawning on her. Laura, they're not panicking because you're gone. They're panicking because they know where you are. And who you're with. As if her words had summoned them, the intercom by the front door buzzed, a shrill, demanding sound that echoed in the marble foyer. Robert's head snapped up. He walked over and pressed the button. Yes. A man's voice, strained and formal, came through the speaker. Mr. Hastings, apologies for the interruption. There is a Mr. and Mrs. Gerald Morrison at the front gate. They are rather insistent, sir. They are demanding to see their daughter. I froze. They were here. They had driven right up to the gate. Tell them, Robert began, his voice like ice, that this is a private residence and... Wait, I said, surprising myself. I looked at Robert. What will they do? Before he could answer, my phone, still in my hand, lit up with my father's name. I hadn't blocked their numbers. Not yet. I stared at it, vibrating angrily in my palm. I declined the call. A second later, a text message. From Dad, Laura, let us in. We need to talk. Then another from Mom. We know you're in there. This is a misunderstanding. We were just upset. We love you. We love you. The hypocrisy was so staggering it made me nauseous. Then another from Dad. Robert Hastings has no right to keep you from us. You are our daughter. Let us in now. The audacity, Michael breathed, his face dark with a rage I had never seen in him. They throw you into the street, and now they're at the gate demanding entry? Not are you safe? Not we are so sorry. But let us in now? They're not here for me, I said, the cold clarity settling over me like a shroud. They're here to fix their mistake. They're here to get their hands on the connection they almost lost. They're here for you. I looked at Michael, then at Robert. They're here for you. The intercom buzzed again, more insistent this time. Sir? They are refusing to leave. Mrs. Morrison is crying. Loudly. I looked at the phone in my hand, at the string of desperate, self-serving, manipulative messages. I thought of my mother's cold eyes and my father's purple rage. I thought of their panic, a panic born not of love but of social and professional fear. I don't want to see them, I said, my voice final. Robert nodded once, his expression one of grim satisfaction. He pressed the intercom button. James, he said, his voice calm and utterly authoritative. Inform Mr. and Mrs. Morrison that this is private property and they are trespassing. Ms. Morrison is here as our guest and does not wish to see them. If they do not leave the premises immediately, you are to call the police and have them removed. Yes, sir, the voice replied. On the phone I could hear Rebecca. Did he say the police? Laura, what is happening? What had to happen, Becca? I said, feeling a strange, hollow exhaustion. They made their choice last night. Now I'm making mine. We stood in the grand foyer in silence. We heard no shouting, just the click of the intercom as the line disconnected. My phone buzzed. And buzzed. And buzzed. A frantic series of calls and texts. You can't do this. We are your parents. This is kidnapping. Think about your father's job, Laura. Ah, there it was. The real truth. Think about your father's job. Then, after about 20 minutes, the barrage stopped. The silence that fell was as heavy and profound as the silence in my car the night before. But this time I wasn't alone. I was surrounded by a new family, a real one. The panic of my parents had been laid bare. It wasn't for their daughter. It was for themselves. And in their panic, they had shown me exactly who they were. The following days settled into a surreal, suspended reality. The frantic calls and texts from my parents had ceased, replaced by a heavy, ominous silence. My phone still buzzed, but it was from Rebecca. Her texts were a confused mix of tentative support and fear of our parents' reactions. Mom's telling people you're unwell and being influenced by the Hastings. Dad won't leave the house. I relayed the messages to my new family. Margaret had snorted, "Unwell? You look better than I've ever seen you." Influenced? Yes, influenced to expect basic human decency. We fell into a routine. Mornings were for bar exam prep. I set up a study corral in the vast, sun-drenched library, my legal textbooks spread across a 19th-century mahogany desk. Afternoons were for planning. Margaret and I discussed wedding venues, caterers, and flower arrangements with an efficiency that was both dazzling and comforting. Evenings were for family dinners, where Robert, Margaret, Michael, and I would gather and talk about our day, the news, Michael's job search in Chicago. It was normal. It was stable. It was everything my childhood home had never been. But the silence from my parents felt less like peace and more like a storm gathering just over the horizon. The attempted ambush at the gate had been repulsed, but it wasn't a resolution. It was a tactical retreat. The resolution came, as it had to, from Robert. He found me in the library on Wednesday, a week after my arrival. I was deep in constitutional law, trying to memorize the nuances of the Commerce Clause. "Laura," he said, standing in the doorway. I looked up, rubbing my tired eyes. "I think it's time we settle this." "Settle what?" I asked, though I knew. "This business with your parents. This limbo," he said, walking into the room. "Their silence is strategic. They're waiting, hoping you'll crawl back, or that they can find some other angle of approach. You need closure. You can't start your new life, you can't prepare for this baby, with this hanging over your head. And frankly," he added, his voice hardening, "I want to look Gerald Morrison in the eye when he explains his actions." Michael, who had entered behind him, came to my side and squeezed my hand. "He's right, Laura. This isn't good for you. It's not good for the baby. You're stressed. Let's finish it. On our terms. In our house." The thought of seeing them again, of facing that coldness and that rage, made my stomach clench. But they were right. I was tired of looking over my shoulder. I was tired of the knot of dread that formed every time my phone buzzed. "Okay," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Okay. What do we do?" "We invite them for dinner," Robert said, as if it were the most logical thing in the world. "Here. Tonight." "Robert, no." I started. "Yes," he insisted gently. "You are not the person who fled their house a week ago. You are in your home. You are surrounded by your family. You are in control. Let them come here and see what they threw away. Let them say their piece, and then you can say yours. And then," he concluded, "it will be done." I looked at Michael, who nodded his solid, unwavering support. I looked at Robert, whose practical, protective strength was like a fortress. "Okay," I said again, this time with more conviction. "Tonight." So I did it. I unblocked their numbers just long enough to send a single, concise text. No emotion, no preamble. Just a text to my father's phone. "Dinner at Hastings Estate. 7 p.m. tonight. Security will have your names." I received no reply. But I knew they would come. They arrived at 6:50 p.m. Punctual even when desperate. I watched from the upstairs window of the blue suite as their sensible, decade-old sedan, a beige model that perfectly matched their beige life, looked hilariously out of place as it crawled up the long, manicured drive. Dad wore his best suit, the one he'd worn to Rebecca's wedding, slightly too tight in the shoulders. Mom clutched her purse to her chest like a shield, wearing a flowered dress I recognized from church. They looked small, nervous, and utterly out of their element. We made them wait. Petty? Maybe. Satisfying? Absolutely. Maria showed them into the formal sitting room, not the cozy one where Robert had first welcomed me, and offered them water. We let them sit there for exactly 20 minutes, stewing in the intimidating silence of a house built on a level of success they could only envy. At 7:10 p.m. we descended. Michael first, his hand on my back. I came next, wearing the emerald green cashmere dress Margaret had bought me. It was elegant, expensive, and showed my 5-month bump prominently, not as a source of shame but as a simple, beautiful fact. Margaret and Robert followed behind us, a united, formidable front. We didn't enter the sitting room. We went straight to the formal dining room where the table was set for 6. Mom. Dad. I nodded coolly as they were ushered in by Maria. I took my seat. Not at the head of the table or at the foot. I sat in the middle, flanked by Michael on my right and Margaret on my left. A fortress of love. My mother's eyes immediately went to my dress, then to the heavy antique silver on the table, and then, inevitably, to my hand. To the 3-carat heirloom diamond engagement ring that had been Michael's grandmother's. I watched her, fascinated as her brain visibly calculated its worth. Her gaze flickered to my father, a silent, complex communication passing between them. Laura, Dad started, his voice hoarse. He cleared his throat. He seemed to realize he had no script for this. You look well. Pregnant, I said, my voice clear in the quiet room. The word you're looking for is pregnant. We came to apologize, Mom said quickly, her eyes darting between me and Robert. Her voice was high-pitched, laced with a false, trembling sincerity. We were so shocked. It was a lot to take in. We didn't mean it, any of it. Of course you're our daughter. Of course we love you. Did you? I asked, picking up my water glass. When, exactly, did you decide to apologize? Was it before or after you found out who the baby's father is? A thick, suffocating silence stretched across the table. My mother's face flushed a dull red. My father stared at his empty plate. Robert stepped in smoothly, ever the host. Perhaps we should start with dinner. Maria, he called. The first course, a delicate soup, arrived as if summoned. My parents stared at the array of silverware beside their plates as if it might bite them. So, Gerald, Robert said, his tone casual, conversational, but with an underlying edge of steel. 17 years you've been with the company. Good work, mostly reliable. My father's head snapped up, startled. Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Hastings. I've always tried to be loyal. Loyalty is an admirable trait, Robert mused, stirring his soup. Tell me, Gerald, does that loyalty extend to your family? Of course. Absolutely, Dad blustered, a little too loudly. Dad, I interrupted, setting my spoon down. Stop. He looked at me, confused. Stop trying to find an angle. Stop trying to manage your boss. This isn't a performance review. Laura, I don't know what you mean. Michael, Dad attempted, trying a new tactic, turning to the man beside me. I had no idea you and Laura were involved. For 6 years, Gerald, Michael said, his voice pleasant but icy. We've been together since our freshman year. And I understand Laura felt the need to keep that private. She was worried you'd try to use it to your advantage at work. Or, as it turns out, that you'd throw her out for being pregnant before you even knew the details. My mother brightened, seizing on the first part of his statement. That's right. That's very thoughtful of her. Very considerate. She was protecting your reputation, Gerald. Unlike parents, I cut in, my voice sharp, who throw their pregnant daughter out into the street without asking a single question. You have to understand, Dad said, leaning forward, his carefully constructed composure cracking. We were shocked. The pregnancy. No warning. I tried to tell you. I shot back, my own control slipping. I stood right there, in that same dining room, and said, I have news. You didn't let me speak. You saw my stomach and you passed judgment. You excommunicated me before I could say a single word. We thought you'd made a terrible mistake. Mom cried, the tears now flowing, real or not, I couldn't tell. The only mistake, Robert Hastings interjected, his voice dropping, was your reaction. He placed his napkin on the table, his soup untouched. He turned his full, undivided attention to my father. Any parent worth the title, Gerald, would have asked questions. Who is the father? What are your plans? How can we help? You told your pregnant daughter, a Yale law graduate, to sleep on the streets. You threw her out like garbage. Now see here, Dad started, his face reddening, his old bluster returning. I don't need parenting advice from someone who... From someone housing your homeless daughter? Robert finished for him. His voice could have frozen hell. You're right. You don't need advice. You need a conscience. The meal continued in an agonizing, impossible silence. Maria cleared the soup bowls. The main course arrived. No one touched it. Finally my mother, her face blotchy from crying, tried again. We're family, she whispered, her hands clasped on the table. We can work through this. Families fight. But we're family. Are we? I set my fork down. I looked her dead in the eye. Was I family when you told me to sleep on the streets? Was I family when you sent me those texts, demanding I think about Dad's job? Was I family when you stood at that gate and screamed about kidnapping? I took a breath, then delivered the final, unanswerable question. Tell me the truth. If I had come home, pregnant, and the father had been a teacher from Yale? Or a mechanic I met? Or God forbid, someone you didn't approve of, someone without money or a name, would you be sitting at this table right now, apologizing? She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing. She had no answer. No, I said, answering for her. You wouldn't. I'd be at that motel by the highway. The only reason you are here is because I am pregnant with his child. I pointed my fork at Michael. Because I am marrying into this family. You are not here because you love me. You are here for damage control. You are here because you are terrified of what you lost. The silence in the room was absolute. My parents had no defense. They were exposed, their shallow, conditional love laid bare for everyone to see. The silence in the grand dining room was a physical weight. It was heavier than the antique silverware, more oppressive than the ancestral portraits staring down from the walls. My mother's face, which had been a mask of strained sincerity, crumbled. But it wasn't the crumbling of remorse. It was the frantic, panicked collapse of a liar who had been cornered by an unassailable truth. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. My father, Gerald, went pale, a sickly, ashen color. His eyes darted from me to Robert Hastings, his jaw working silently. He wasn't just a father being confronted by his daughter. He was an employee sitting at his boss's table, having been exposed as a monstrous hypocrite. Laura, my mother finally whispered, her hand fluttering to her throat. That's not fair. It's not like that. Fair? I asked, my voice dangerously calm. I placed my own fork and knife neatly on my plate. Fair was you asking me, are you okay? Fair was you saying, come inside, let's talk, you're our daughter. Fair was you showing one single solitary ounce of concern for me or for your grandchild. Instead, you chose what will people say? You chose sleep on the streets. So no, you don't get to talk about fair in this house. I looked from my mother's devastated, self-pitying expression to my father's terrified, angry one. The knot of fear and obligation that had lived in my stomach for 25 years, the constant, low-grade hum of needing their approval, simply evaporated. It wasn't a snap. It was a slow, quiet release, leaving only a cold, profound clarity. I finally saw them. Not as my parents, but as the people they truly were, shallow, selfish, and terrified of irrelevance. Here's what's going to happen now, I said, my voice surprising me with its strength. It was the voice I used in mock trials, the one that projected utter confidence and control. You're going to finish this charade of a meal or not? I don't really care. And then you are going to leave. I leaned forward, making sure I had their full attention. You will not contact me again. Not by phone, not by text, not through Rebecca. You will not show up at my apartment in Chicago. You will not show up at my job. I paused, letting the words sink in. And you will not be grandparents to this child. That title is earned. It is not a biological right. It is a privilege. And you, I looked at both of them one by one, you failed the test in the most spectacular way possible. You gave up that right when you chose your reputation over your daughter. You can't mean that, my mother gasped, the tears becoming a hysterical torrent. Our grandchild. Our own flesh and blood. You can't take our grandchild from us. Take. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. I'm not taking anything. You threw us out. You rejected this grandchild sight unseen. You were content to have this baby, your flesh and blood, sleep in a car or a highway motel. Did you forget that part? Or does that detail not fit into the new narrative you're building? We made a mistake, Laura, my father burst out, his voice desperate. He was finally grasping the true, irreversible nature of the consequences. A terrible, terrible mistake, we see that now. But we can be a family. We can fix this. I work for Robert. You're marrying Michael. We'll be connected. We can put this all behind us. And there it was. The quiet part said out loud. The final, damning admission. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about family. It was about connection. About access. About the proximity to the power and wealth that he now saw slipping through his fingers. I didn't even have to respond. Robert Hastings did it for me. No, Robert said. The single word cut through the room like a razor. My father flinched as if he'd been struck. Robert placed his hands flat on the table. Let me be perfectly clear, Gerald. Your assumption of a connection is dangerously misplaced. He leveled a look at my father that was devoid of all warmth, the look of a CEO addressing a fatal error in judgment. Your employment at Hastings Industries is, as I told Laura, safe. As long as you continue to do your job. As long as you perform adequately. But if you ever attempt to use this family connection for any personal or professional gain, if you harass Laura or Michael, if you show up uninvited at their home or here ever again, if you even imply to colleagues that you have some special in with my family, that will change. Instantly. Your 17 years of employment will be irrelevant. Do you understand me? My father's pale face went bloodless. This was a language he understood perfectly. Not the emotional plea of a daughter, but the cold, hard terms of his survival. Yes, sir, he whispered, his eyes locked on his plate. Understood. Furthermore, Margaret added, her voice soft but with a core of tempered steel. She had been silent, watching, but now she spoke, and her words were, in their own way, just as devastating as her husband's. When people in town ask about your daughter, and you will tell them she is a successful attorney in Chicago. You will tell them she is doing well. She leaned in slightly. You will say nothing more. No details about her personal life, her marriage, or her child. You gave up the right to share in her joy. You will not tarnish it with your gossip or your feigned involvement. You chose to be strangers. You will remain so. My mother stared at her, her mouth agape. The idea of not being able to brag about, or complain about, or simply discuss her daughter's life was a punishment she hadn't even conceived of. Her hysteria found a new, more aggressive target. This is kidnapping, she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me, then at the Hastings. Parental alienation. That's what this is. We'll sue. We'll sue for grandparents' rights. You can't just keep our grandchild from us. We have rights. I almost smiled. The lawyer in me, the one who had spent the last week buried in textbooks, finally fully took the floor. Try it, I said, my voice sweet and lethal. Please. I welcome it. I ticked the points off on my fingers. I'll be taking the Illinois bar, so let's look at Illinois law, shall we? To petition for grandparents' rights, you must prove, among other things, unreasonable denial of visitation by the parents that causes undue mental, physical, or emotional harm to the child. A child who, by the way, isn't born yet and with whom you have no pre-existing relationship. Or you'd have to prove that the parents, that's me and Michael, are unfit. Which, given our respective standing, seems unlikely to stick. I leaned forward again, my voice dropping. On the other hand, I have witnesses. I have Mr. Hastings, his staff, and my fiancé, who can all testify that you threw your pregnant daughter out of your home and told her to sleep on the streets. I have the text messages, the ones where you screamed about kidnapping and begged me to think about Dad's job rather than my own well-being. How do you think that plays in family court, Mom? How do you think a judge will react when your own daughter, an officer of the court, testifies to your profound and cruel abandonment? So please, I invited, file the paperwork. I'd love to see you try. They stared at me like I'd grown a second head. This wasn't their compliant, quiet daughter who always sought their approval. This was a stranger. This was an attorney. And she had just dismantled them, piece by piece, leaving them with absolutely no leverage. My father was broken. He just stared at his plate. My mother was sobbing, a hopeless, defeated sound. Michael stood up, placing his napkin on the table. I think we're done here, he said, his voice final. He nodded to the doorway where James had appeared as if summoned by a silent signal. James will drive you home. They stood, two puppets whose strings had been cut. My father looked lost. My mother, in one last desperate attempt, stumbled toward me. Laura, please don't do this. We're sorry, she begged, her hands reaching for me. I stood up and stepped back, just out of her reach. Michael moved to my side, a solid wall. I believe you are, I said, and the sadness I felt was not for me, but for them. For how pathetic they were. I believe you're sorry. You're sorry you found out too late to benefit from this connection. You're sorry you can't brag to your friends about your daughter marrying into the Hastings family. You're sorry you lost control of the narrative. You're sorry you've been publicly humiliated in front of your husband's boss. I looked her dead in the eye. But sorry for hurting me? Sorry for abandoning your pregnant daughter when she needed you? Sorry for calling me a disgrace? I shook my head, a small, final movement. No. You're not sorry for that at all. You're just sorry you got caught. They had no words left. James quietly, firmly, escorted them from the room. We heard the front door open and then close. I stood in the silence of the massive dining room, not moving, just breathing. I walked to the tall windows, parting the heavy curtains. I watched as their beige sedan crept back down the long, imposing driveway, its taillights two small red eyes in the darkness. They disappeared through the gates. And they were gone. I stood there for a long time, just watching the empty drive. I was waiting to feel something. Regret. Sadness. Grief. I waited to cry, to feel the loss of the only family I had ever known. But all I felt was quiet. A profound, echoing quiet. Michael came up behind me, wrapping his strong arms around me, his hands settling protectively on my bump. He rested his chin on my shoulder. You okay? He whispered. I leaned back against his chest, the solid, unwavering warmth of him. I thought of the motel, the McDonald's parking lot, the fear. I thought of the coldness in my parents' eyes. And then I thought of the man holding me, of the two people still sitting at the table, a silent, supportive rear guard. You know what? I said, turning my head to kiss his cheek. I am. I really am. The anchor that had been weighing me down my entire life, demanding I contort myself to fit its shape, was finally cut. I was floating. I was free. For a long time after their car disappeared, I remained at the window, staring into the darkness. The grand dining room was silent behind me, the remnants of the untouched meal a testament to the battle that had just concluded. I felt hollowed out, as if I had just undergone a painful but necessary surgery. The diseased part of me, the part that had spent a lifetime craving the approval of two people incapable of giving it, had been excised. The wound was raw, but the infection was gone. Their loss, Laura, Robert said, his voice quiet from the table. An astounding, immeasurable loss. Margaret rose from her chair and came to my side, placing a warm hand on my arm. Well, she said, in a tone that was both gentle and practical, I believe Maria has a chocolate lava cake for dessert that has nothing to do with any of them. And we, she added, squeezing my arm, have a wedding to plan. It was her way of bringing me back. Back to the present, back to the future, back to this family that was actively, joyfully choosing me. I let her guide me back to the table, and I sat beside Michael, who laced his fingers through mine under the table. His hand was a warm, solid anchor in the sea of my emotions. We talked. We talked about Chicago, about the bar exam, about baby names. We ate the decadent chocolate cake. We systematically, deliberately, replaced the poison of the last hour with the antidote of a normal, loving evening. And yet, I was still processing. I felt a strange, detached sadness. It wasn't grief for the parents I had just banished. It was grief for the parents I had never had. The ones who should have been here, excited about their first grandchild, proud of their daughter. The ones who should have been arguing with Margaret over who got to spoil the baby more. I was grieving a fantasy. My phone, sitting on the table, buzzed. I flinched, my stomach instantly clenching, a reflex born of the last week. But it wasn't my parents. The name on the screen was Rebecca. I looked at Michael. "It's my sister. Do you want to take it?" he asked, his gaze steady. I think I have to," I said. "She deserves to hear it from me." "Want us to stay?" "No," I decided. I'll take it in the library. Will you come with me?" "Always." He walked with me, his hand on the small of my back, into the vast, quiet library. The room smelled of old books and lemon oil, a sanctuary of calm. I sat in one of the deep leather armchairs and Michael sat on the ottoman at my feet, taking my hand. I hit the speakerphone button. "Becca? Laura? Oh my God, what happened?" Her voice was high, frantic. "Mom just called me. I've never heard her like this. She's hysterical. She's screaming. She's saying you've disowned them, that the Hastings have brainwashed you against them, that you threatened them with lawyers. What is going on?" I took a deep breath, grounding myself. "Becca, listen to me. What did Mom and Dad tell you happened the night I got here? The very first night." There was a pause. They told me you never showed up," she said, her voice smaller. "They said they were worried that you were missing. Then they said you'd just run off, that you were being dramatic." "They lied," I said, my voice flat, devoid of the anger from earlier, leaving only the cold, hard truth. "I showed up for dinner just like I said I would. They saw I was pregnant." Before I could say another word, Dad called me a disgrace and an embarrassment. Mom told me to go sleep on the streets. They kicked me out, Becca. They threw their pregnant daughter out into the night. They didn't even ask who the father was, if I was okay, nothing. They just threw me out. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could hear her breathing, quick and shallow. She said it was a misunderstanding," Rebecca finally whispered. "She said they were just shocked and said things they didn't mean. They meant them," I said. "They meant them enough to let me sit in a McDonald's parking lot, homeless, trying to figure out which motel was safer. The only reason they're sorry now, the only reason they're hysterical, is because they found out who the father is. Michael Hastings. My dad's boss's son. They're not sorry they hurt me, Becca. They're sorry they fumbled a connection. They came here tonight to this house and Dad literally said it. He was worried about losing his connection through our marriage." "Oh my God," Rebecca breathed. The frantic panic in her voice was gone, replaced by a dawning, weary horror. That sounds like them. That sounds exactly like them. Especially Dad. God, connection, that's his favorite word. They came here tonight, not to apologize to me, but to do damage control for themselves," I continued, the words flowing easily now. "And when they realized they couldn't control me, that I wasn't their little pawn anymore, Mom started screaming. She threatened to sue me. To sue for grandparents' rights to a baby she rejected a week ago. That's when I guess I threatened her. I told her the legal facts, Becca. I'm a lawyer. I told her she had no case. I told her I had witnesses to them abandoning me. That's what she's calling threatening. Me telling the truth. She said you were cruel," Rebecca whispered. "That you were cold and heartless." "Was I cold?" I asked, looking at Michael, who just rubbed my hand. "Or was I just done? Was I just not letting them manipulate me anymore? They're not the victims here, Becca. I am. Their grandchild is. They're just angry because, for the first time in my life, I didn't let them." There was another long pause. I heard her sniffle, then take a deep, shuddering breath. "I believe you," she said, her voice thick. The words hit me with an unexpected force. You do?" "Yeah, Laura. I do," she said, a bitter humor in her voice. "Why do you think I live in Portland? Why do you think I left at 18 and never looked back? Not really. Because love in that house always came with a price tag. It was always conditional. It was always about what you could do for them, how you made them look, what they could get from you. You just got the worst of it. You were the perfect one, the Yale-bound star. You were their show pony. Until you did something human. Until you weren't perfect anymore. Tears pricked my eyes, tears of a different kind. Not of loss, but of recognition. I didn't know you felt that way, I whispered. We never really talked, did we? She said sadly. I was just so desperate to get out. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. I'm sorry they did that to you, Laura. It's monstrous. It's okay, I said, though it wasn't. But it will be. I have Michael. And his parents. I looked at Michael, who smiled at me. Becca, they've been incredible. They've been more of a family to me in 1 week than Mom and Dad ever were. They took me in from a McDonald's parking lot without a second thought. That's good, she said, and I could hear the genuine relief in her voice. I'm glad. I'm really, really glad you're safe. And with people who actually, you know. Yeah, I said. I know. A new, fragile silence settled between us. So what now? Rebecca asked quietly. With us. I hesitated. This was uncharted territory. I don't know, I answered honestly. I'm done with Mom and Dad. For good. I have to be. I can't have that poison in my life. Or in my baby's life. But you're my sister. You didn't do this. Yeah, she said, her voice stronger. I am. And I don't want to lose you because of them. They've taken enough. Look, can I come to Chicago? Sometime after you're settled? After the baby's born? Can I meet my niece or nephew? I looked at Michael. He was already nodding, a warm smile on his face. Yeah, Becca, I said, a small, genuine smile touching my own lips for the first time in this conversation. I'd really like that. Okay, she said, sounding like she was crying and smiling at the same time. Okay. Good. God, Laura, good luck. With the bar, the baby, everything. You too, Becca. Talk soon. I hung up the phone and sat there, the quiet of the library settling around me. I felt a mix of emotions so complex I couldn't untangle them. Sadness for the family that was irrevocably broken. A strange, light-headed sense of freedom. And a new, tentative shoot of hope. Maybe not all my family was lost. Maybe the part that mattered, the part that was capable of love without conditions, was still there. She believes me, I said to Michael, the wonder of it sinking in. She's on my side. Of course she is, he said, standing up and pulling me to my feet. He wrapped me in a hug. She knows them just like you do. She just escaped sooner. We walked back to the sitting room, the cozy one this time. Robert was reading the paper and Margaret was knitting something small and yellow. They both looked up as we entered, their faces warm and questioning. Everything all right, dear? Margaret asked. I smiled, a real smile this time. That was my sister, Rebecca, I said, sitting on the sofa and tucking my feet under me. She believes me. She's going to come visit us in Chicago after the baby is born. Margaret's face lit up. Well, of course she does, dear, she said, her knitting needles clicking contentedly. Not everyone in that family can be blind. That's wonderful news. Robert lowered his paper, a smile of deep satisfaction on his face. Good, he said simply. That's good. Family, the real kind, Laura, is about who shows up. It's about who chooses you. It seems your sister is choosing to show up. I think so, I said, leaning my head on Michael's shoulder. He kissed the top of my head. I looked at the three of them, this circle of warmth in a house that had become my refuge. The wound from my parents was still there, a sharp ache of betrayal. But it wasn't a gaping void. It was being filled, stitch by stitch, with something new. Something stronger. Something infinitely better. It was being filled with real love. The library was quiet after I hung up with Rebecca, but it was a different kind of quiet than before. It wasn't the silence of absence or tension. It was the settled, peaceful quiet of resolution. Michael still sat at my feet, his hand holding mine, his presence a steady, solid warmth. The call had been the final thread to untangle. I had faced my abusers and I had reclaimed my sister. The past was, finally, where it belonged. We returned to the cozy sitting room. Robert had, indeed, lowered his newspaper, and Margaret's knitting needles were clicking in a steady, comforting rhythm. The scene was the epitome of domestic peace, a portrait of the life I hadn't known I was missing. "Well," Robert said, setting his paper aside definitively. He looked at me, his gaze sharp but incredibly kind. "The past is handled. Now for the future. You have the bar exam in, what is it, 8 weeks? I nodded, the familiar knot of academic anxiety tightening my stomach. 8 weeks. End of July. It's a lot. Think you can study for that while planning a wedding and, well..." He gestured gently toward my stomach. "Growing a person?" A week ago, that question would have sent me into a spiral of panic. I would have seen it as another impossible standard to meet. But sitting here, surrounded by this unconditional support, it felt different. It felt like a challenge, not a threat. I felt Michael squeeze my hand and I smiled a small, confident smile. "Watch me," I said, my voice clear and firm. "I'm pretty good at multitasking." Michael laughed, a proud, happy sound, and he stood up, pulling me with him. He kissed my temple. "That's my girl," he said, his voice full of an admiration that made my heart swell. "Our girl," Margaret corrected gently from her chair, not even looking up from her knitting. The words were soft, casual, but they landed with the force of a tectonic shift. "Our daughter." I froze. "Our daughter." She had said it so naturally, as if it had always been true, as if it were the most obvious fact in the world. It wasn't a question. It wasn't an offer. It was a statement. I looked at Robert, and he was smiling, a look of profound agreement on his face. I looked at Michael, who was beaming. And in that moment, the last lingering shadow of the girl who had been kicked out of her home vanished. I wasn't an imposition. I wasn't a guest. I wasn't a charity case taken in from the cold. I was a daughter. I had been chosen. I was wanted. Tears pricked my eyes, the hot, sudden tears of gratitude, of an overwhelming, bone-deep relief. I finally understood. Maybe that's what family really was. It wasn't the people you were born to, not necessarily. It wasn't the blood in your veins or a shared last name. It was the people who chose you. The people who saw you at your absolute lowest, at your most broken, and instead of turning away in disgust, they said, "Come in," instead of "Get out." The people who offered spare rooms and second chances, who offered protection and warmth and love without conditions, without expecting anything in return. My parents, in their cruelty, had given me one final unintentional gift. They had shown me, in the starkest terms possible, exactly what kind of parent I would never be. My child, the little one growing safely inside me, would never for 1 second of one day doubt that they were wanted. They would never have to earn my love. They would never have to be perfect to be worthy of basic human kindness. They would never, ever be made to feel like a burden or a disgrace. They would know love from their very first breath to my very last. That was my promise. That was the vow I made to them, right there in that warm, safe room. "Now," Robert said, his practical voice pulling me from my thoughts, "back to business. The wedding." He reached for the tablet on the side table, his demeanor shifting into the familiar, efficient mode of the CEO. "Michael tells me you two had planned a large affair for next year." "We did," Michael said, sitting on the sofa and pulling me down beside him, tucking me against his side. "But given the accelerated timeline," he grinned, placing a hand on my bump, "and the revised guest list, I think we're both leaning toward something different." I thought of the massive 300-person wedding my mother had always dreamed of, a garish affair designed not to celebrate a marriage but to show off to her friends. The very idea of it now, of standing in front of a crowd of people, of performing happiness, made me feel ill. "Small," I said, my voice firm. I don't want a performance. I just want the people who matter. The ones who show up." Robert looked at Margaret, a knowing smile passing between them. "Small ceremony," he nodded, tapping at his tablet. "I like it. Here. In the garden? It's beautiful in August." "Perfect," Margaret said, finally setting her knitting aside. Her eyes were bright with excitement. "Just family. Us. Your sister, Rebecca, if she can fly in." A few of your friends from Yale. Intimate, beautiful, and real. She reached over and patted my knee. That's all you really need, my dear. The rest is just noise. We can have a larger reception in Chicago next year if you still want it, Michael offered, to celebrate with our friends and colleagues. Maybe, I said. But this is all I need. This is perfect. We sat there for the next 2 hours, the four of us. We planned a wedding. We drank tea. We argued playfully over whether a string quartet or a simple pianist was better for the garden. Margaret and I discussed flowers, Robert and Michael discussed logistics. It was the most normal, most loving, most functional family discussion I had ever been a part of. No one was trying to score points. No one was worried about what anyone else would think. No one was jockeying for position or trying to leverage the event for their own gain. We were just a family planning a happy day. I looked around the table at these 3 people who had, in the span of 1 week, completely remade my world. Michael, my steady, unwavering partner, who had loved me through 6 years of secrecy and never faltered. Robert, the protective, practical patriarch who had offered me sanctuary and demanded nothing in return. And Margaret, the warm, welcoming mother who had called me daughter and meant it. This was what I had been looking for all along. Not my parents' conditional, brittle approval. But this real, unconditional, solid as bedrock love. Margaret was right. It was all I really needed. It was more than enough. It was everything.